Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to get started this evening. Welcome this evening. My name is Greg Natterer. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science here, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our Speaking of Engineering lecture series. Thank you very much for coming out. I'd also like to extend special greetings this evening to Mr. Sean LaCour to my right here, who is going to be our guest speaker. Sean is also the Director of Operations with Newfoundland Power. Welcome this evening, Sean. Further, I'd like to acknowledge Jeff Emberley to my left here, who is the CEO and Registrar of Paganel, that's Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Newfoundland and Labrador. Jeff will come up later to speak on behalf of Paganel and their sponsorship of this lecture series. This session this evening and this lecture series is co-sponsored by Paganel. For that, we are very grateful, and the faculty. Paganel is an organization with the mandate of regulating engineering and geoscience professions in the public interest of the province, and it has approximately 4,000 members. Just a few housekeeping items. In the event of an alarm or an emergency, let's exit this room calmly and turn right at the exit. There are two exits at the back, and we would leave the building through the main doors of the foyer just to our immediate right as we exit, and then turn to the left. The muster station is lot 22. That's across the road in the business building parking lot. And also, for your information, washrooms are just to the left as you exit the doors at the back of the lecture theater here. So just a little bit about the lecture series. It is one that we offer several times throughout the year, and it's important to us because it raises the awareness of engineering in the community, the general public, academic community, and among students. We're very proud of the work that we do here in the faculty, as well as the success of our students. And I'd like to just spend a few moments telling you about some recent successes. A few weeks ago, we held our annual charity ball. For those of you who are not aware, each year our students raise funds to give back to the community for a charity of their choice. And this year was the 12th annual charity ball, and they raised $19,000 that went towards Stella's Circle, a great cause. Our student society also hosted the Atlantic Engineering Competition this year. This is an annual event that has been going on for decades, competition among the engineering schools in Atlantic Canada, and again, they represented us very well and won first place in two categories, one in debating category and the other in the consulting, and second place in, I think, 4 or 5 other competitions. There will be 19 of our students going to the Canadian National Competition in Toronto in a couple of months. And just one more, last weekend actually was a great Northern Concrete Toboggan race. It's a lot of fun. Students design and develop concrete toboggans, and they compete against other schools across the country. This year it was held in Kitchener, and our students won first place in the People's Choice Award for their designs. So many successes that our students have, of which we're very proud. So on to tonight's lecture. Tonight's lecture is about how a country's electricity system is restored after a devastating hurricane. As you know, as we all know, on September 2017, just some few months ago, Hurricane Irma caused great destruction to the tiny country of Turks and Caicos Islands in the Eastern Caribbean. The electricity system was devastated, and as a result of the process, it is an electricity system that is operated by Fortis, and Fortis's work in this restoration will be a topic of the lecture tonight. The Fortis response team, which included employees and contract personnel from Canada, the U.S., and the Caribbean, rebuilt many kilometers of power lines and restored power to the entire country within 60 days, which is quite impressive. Having nearly 35 years of experience working in the electrical utility business, Sean helped lead the Fortis team in the Turks and Caicos. Tonight, he's going to describe their mission and the challenges that they faced in this effort to restore power to the people of the islands. Mr. LaCour graduated from Memorial with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. He's worked his entire career with Newfoundland Power and in various engineering and management positions. He's currently the Director of Operations with responsibilities for leading system operations, generation, and electrical maintenance groups, as well as safety and environment management. He's a member of Paganel and a past chair of Paganel's Board of Directors, as well as a Fellow of Engineers Canada, which is a very prestigious honor to hold. Please join me in welcoming Sean LaCour this evening.
Can you hear me okay? So I'm going to try and stick to my notes so I'm not too long-winded. All right, Chris, let me down already here. Hang on. Ooh. Try this. Oh, I'm stuck. All right.
Technology is great when it works.
Am I supposed to point at something? There you go. I'll start a bit with Fortis. I suspect, as most of you know, Fortis started right here in St. John's, Newfoundland back in 1987. And in fact, the founder of the Fortis group of companies, Dr. Angus Bruno, the late Dr. Angus Bruno, this lecture theatre is named in his honor. Since then, it's grown to be a huge, huge company. I guess to briefly on its expansion, it started here, it went to Maritime Electric in Prince Edward Island, Ontario, Fortis, Ontario, out west and on Alberta and British Columbia, and that's where they got into the gas business with the acquisition of Turks and Caicos. And then into the Caribbean, you have business operations in Belize, on Grand Cayman Island, and of course Turks and Caicos. And more recently, in 2013, they expanded into the U.S. market and acquired Central Hudson, UNS Energy. Both of those are gas and electric utilities. And the most recent acquisition was ITC Holdings, which is an independent transmission holding company in the Midwestern states. And as you can see by the numbers, it's an impressive sized company today, but it started right here. So a little bit about the Fortis operating group. Fortis has a number of operating groups, and all the Fortis utilities are members of those groups, but the operating group meets and shares best practices in operation and maintenance of generation and transmission and distribution systems, best practices in engineering and utility business, and of course customer service. With this expansion to the U.S., there's a huge pool of engineering and operational expertise above which to draw from. In each of these utilities, there are teams of employees who are ready, almost like on standby. They have their passports and vaccinations, and they're ready to respond anytime they get a call from a utility who's having to deal with an oncoming huge storm or natural disaster. The Fortis operating groups, they have, of course, mutual assistance agreements in place among themselves. They also have a hurricane preparedness website that we use to alert one another. So we're well informed when a large storm or hurricane approaches any of our utility operations. And we also have a fair bit of experience at this. With Irma now, we have 9 major storms through the history of Fortis, of which we responded to. The first one goes way back to 1988, when Jamaica was hit by Gilbert. I'm not going to read through them all. In Belize, you can see the list there, and of course we'll add Irma to it. I personally was involved in 2000 with Hurricane Keith, in 2008 with Hurricane Ike, obviously with Igor in Newfoundland, and of course just recently with Irma in Turks and Caicos. And just to give an example how this mutual aid works, in 2010 we had crews from Alberta and Maritime Electric travel to help us restore power after Hurricane Igor. As well, we got help from our neighboring utility, Newfoundland Labrador Hydro, to help with that. So it's a great network and a great resource, and we've got some experience at this. Wow, 2017 was quite the year for major hurricanes. Back in Harvey was a slow-moving Category 4 hurricane. It was mostly a rain event, flooding event in both Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. And I pulled this information I'm going to share with you from Wikipedia, so take it for what it is. It was responsible for 82 deaths, and the damage estimate is $125 billion. So Harvey ties Hurricane Katrina for the most costly storm in history. Irma also was a Category 5, and it was the strongest storm ever recorded in the open Atlantic region. It impacted the Virgin Islands, Barbuda, Puerto Rico, Dominica, Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, Cuba, and Florida. And it was responsible for 134 deaths and $64 billion in damage. 2 weeks after Irma hit, along came Maria, a huge storm, a Category 5. Now, in using those terms, I should explain, using the Saffir-Simpson scale, a Category 5 hurricane has sustained winds in excess of 252 kilometers an hour. Unfortunately, Maria was responsible for 547 deaths, $92 billion in damage, and it was the worst disaster ever in Puerto Rico and Dominica. And I understand, as of today, there are still around 400,000 customers in Puerto Rico without electricity. Nate was only a small hurricane, a Category 1, and it was responsible for 45 deaths in Central America. So to give you some sense of the devastation and the loss and the tragedy caused by hurricanes, and it strikes me that the number of hurricanes that are being generated every season seems to be on the increase. So I can only expect to see more of this in future years, unfortunately. Now to zoom in a little bit, Turks and Caicos is a very tiny country. It's a British overseas territory. It has roughly 35,000 people. It's located due north of the boundary between Haiti and Dominican Republic, about 200 kilometers due north of that. It's comprised of 8 major islands within a small group, but they span an area about only 135 kilometers long. Tourism is the big driver after GDP. I think it's responsible for close to 50% of their GDP. The most populated island is Providenciales, or Provo as they call it. Probably has 80% of the population and is by far the most developed island. The capital of the country is actually in Grand Turk, over on your far right. North and Middle Caicos are largely rural areas, very lightly populated. South Caicos, if you see that there, is largely a fishing community, and West and East Caicos are uninhabited. So this is a bit more detail on the track of Irma. It was a strong, fast-moving. The eye of it passed about 50 to 60 kilometers south of the line of islands in the Turks and Caicos, which was fortunate. And as you may know, generally for hurricanes, on the track of it, to the right of it, usually brings the highest, most intense winds, and to the left of the track, you get more precipitation, more rain. So Irma did not drop a lot of rain on the Turks and Caicos, which was a good thing. Storm surges were moderate, weren't a big issue. The big issue was the very, very strong winds that caused the damage. So share with you a little bit of data, and I got this from the government of Turks and Caicos Islands Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies. This is their data they pulled from surveying. 80% of the homes received damage. 400 homes were completely destroyed. 700 were significantly destroyed to the point they were uninhabitable. 70% of buildings were damaged, and 70% of critical infrastructure was impacted. The telecommunications system went down. The unofficial estimates are around $300 million in damage. Plus, you've got the economic impact, the hit on their tourism industry, that sector, set back significantly. So a major impact on this very tiny country. So the first group of Fortis employees to head down to answer the call for help came from Canada. And they arrived in Toronto the day after the hurricane, which hit on the 8th. On the 9th, we congregated in Toronto, and we're just waiting the all clear from the government to open the airport. And when they got the all clear on Sunday, we jumped aboard a charter flight and headed down. A group of utility workers, mostly line staff, power line technicians we call them, some engineers and planners and supervisors. Whatever they could fit aboard that plane, we did. Their tools, their equipment, some materials, food and water, we weren't sure what to expect. Another point here, a complicating factor, was the devastation throughout Florida caused by Irma and throughout the other eastern Caribbean areas, and then later by Maria, really taxed a huge demand on shipping and ports. So it was everybody was looking for the same things: materials to rebuild, food and water. Rebuilding the electrical system was probably down on the list of priorities. But Fortis, through its relationships and contacts, managed to secure for the transportation of trucks and materials. So we had the workers in there, but for the first few weeks, it was a struggle to get the equipment there, because some of these ports were damaged themselves. So it took a while to reestablish the shipping lanes and get materials in trucks into the country. Fortis launched its crisis communications plan and worked with the Fortis TCI, I should say. That's the local, when I say Fortis TCI, that's the local utility on Turks and Caicos. They worked with Fortis to launch their communications plan to keep the government informed of what was going on and of what our response would be. Now I'm going to call Chris up to show you this video. It was originally put together as a thank you to the first group of employees who went down there, but it really has a good overview of the situation that we faced.
The scale of Hurricane Irma was nothing like I've seen before. Tracking the movement of the storm from time it entered the Eastern Caribbean.
That is Irma tearing across the island of Anguilla, a Category 5 storm right now, winds of 175 miles an hour. On the island of Barbuda, nearly every building and home damaged or destroyed. And as we come on the air tonight, Irma is now plowing into Turks and Caicos, the most dangerous side of this hurricane, hitting there.
I have never seen a hurricane with the intensity of Irma before, and I've been through other hurricanes like Ivan and Cayman in 2004. The good thing with Irma, and the very good thing, if there's anything good about Irma, is moving very fast and very quickly. But the intensity, the 4 or 5 or so hours that it was over the Turks and Caicos Islands, I have never seen anything like that before.
Hurricane Irma, a Category 5 storm, caused extensive damage across the Turks and Caicos Islands, destroying infrastructure and ripping apart homes. The Fortis response was rapid and comprehensive. Within 48 hours, boots were on the ground.
Fortis has its group of companies, has what we call the FOG group, Fortis Operation Group. And when there's a hurricane that threatens any of the subs or any severe weather situation that threatens any of the subs, that group starts to meet, and we started to send posting to that group saying that we were tracking the storm, That then triggered certain action within the Fortis group, and they started to mobilize. We went through that whole process of identifying personnel, of identifying equipment, of the whole logistics of getting people down here, because we wanted to get down here very quickly and hit the ground running. So chartering planes, the whole logistics. Fortis group of companies does this very well. There's no other group of companies that does this better than Fortis. What we see is the strength of Fortis on display. The resources, the personnel, the wherewithal to respond quickly. We were the first emergency response team underground in the Turks and Caicos Islands after the hurricane. That is the strength of Fortis. And I want to say a thank you to all of the crews who left their families, who left the utilities in their cities from all over Canada and the Cayman Islands to come here to help us. We need their help. That's what I know. If this country is going to bounce back quickly, it means that we have to restore electricity quickly. Electricity is essential to the return of the country to business as usual. And the quicker we can restore electricity, hotels are already publishing their reopening date, and they're doing that with the confidence they have in Fortis, because that's key. Electricity is key. So what do I want to say to the group of companies? What can I say? But thank you. This country needed you, and you have responded, and we thank you.
Back to normal. Thank you. I'll give you a first-hand view of what we're facing. So, what do? You're here, you're gathered up. Where do you begin? We always begin with safety, of course. And safety orientation and getting familiar with the Turks and Caicos electrical system was the first order of business. All team members were put through that orientation training and understanding the electrical system and their safety, their approach to safety. They're giving lessons on heat exhaustion, how to keep yourself from getting dehydrated. And this was a huge factor, especially in the first 2 or 3 weeks after the hurricane. I guess Maria was pushing hot air, but the humidity was like 41 to 44 degrees Celsius, the humidex. So that was a real risk for us. Understanding the risk of insect bites and the Zika virus, cautionary measures. Even driving on the left-hand side of the road, and these roundabouts took some getting used to. Perhaps they were a hazard in themselves. Everything from safe work procedures to how to handle traffic control when you're on the work site, we covered that off. And of course, another safety risk turned out to be, as customers got some generation going and backup, the risk of backfeed into the electrical system that the crews are working on was a concern and a risk that we had to be mindful of. First 4 to 5 days, I would say, the main order of business was trying to make it safe for the public. You can imagine the devastation. Wires, poles, transformers strewn down over buildings, driveways, cars. So getting that stuff off the street, some of it was pretty precarious, just held up by broken poles, ready to fall down. So getting it cleaned up and making it safe was the first order of business. Workers had to get out amongst that and avoid those risks themselves. And it was a lot of hard physical work. And keep in mind, for the first few weeks, we had the bodies there, but we didn't have any additional trucks. So a lot of this was just hard work and in hot conditions that we weren't used to. So there was certainly a risk of cuts and bruises and infection, that sort of thing. And cellular communications were down. And you can appreciate that created obvious challenges as well. But the first priority for power restoration was the hospital and the airport and the water plant. And it's not a water treatment plant, it's actually where they make water from salt water. And if we didn't get that up, the water would have been flown in. So that was a key focus for us to get the plant back on. And I should say that was done in pretty short order in the first few days. Supplying the effort, just to try to put this in perspective for you, the local Fortis TCI utility has 20 line workers, 20 trucks, and they had around 250 poles in stock. So we arrived with 65 more employees, and then further on we added, contractors to that, and other waves of employees and more vehicles and materials. At the end of the project, when you look back at it, with the additional resources that were brought in, we increased the capacity for line construction and repair by 7 or 8 times what the local utility could have done. So I'll give you some sense of the extra help we're able to do. This is a summary of the damage assessment. And again, that was the first order of business. The first week or two, we try to get a handle on this, then you fine-tune it into the second week. But you had to get a handle on what the damage were and where the priority areas were, what were the easy things to get fixed, and what were going to take some time. And so as you can see, and I mentioned Providenciales, that's where 75–80% of people live, and it's the highly developed island. 65% of the poles on that island required some repair. Either straightened up, something fixed on them. You had to go to 65% of the poles, and 600 poles had to be replaced completely. And these other numbers is what you see for the other islands. The system has just over 10,000 poles, and we had to do some type of repair on about 70% of those poles. And it turned out we had to replace 1,500 poles in total, which is about 15% of all the poles installed. So give you some sense of the scale of the work that was ahead of us. In addition, there were 500 mostly pole-mounted transformers had to be replaced. Turned out there was 200,000 meters, 200 kilometers of wire had to be installed. And I don't have a count on streetlights, but it must be approaching 1,000 streetlights had to be replaced. So that'll give you a sense of the damage. So this slide, this is a map and the electrical system overlaid for Provo, the main island, and that's where I was stationed, trying to work with the team to prioritize, get the power back on in Provo. But just to give you some sense for it, the blue lines you see there and the square dots, that's the transmission and substation system. Now, all the generation down there, as you might know, is diesel fired. Fortunately, the diesel plant sustained very little damage. They got it back up and running within a day. Same with the transmission system. Those light blue and dark blue, those are 35 kV transmission. One circuit is overhead and one is underground. And it forms a loop system supplying 3 substations. And here's where I might use my pointer. 3 substations are here. This is where the diesel generating plant is too. That's power plant substation. This one is Blue Hills. And this one over here is Grace Bay. And I can tell you that after Hurricane Ike in 2008, the utility spent a lot of money to toughen up the system, harden the system, as they called it. They actually rebuilt the transmission circuits with larger class poles, shorter spans, stronger hardware, and it paid off. This system was relatively unscathed by Irma. So that was a great starting point. He spent a lot of money on the diesel plant as well, prevent it from getting flooding, and then strengthen the roof of it, and just put the bunkers and the berms around their fuel storage area. So that investment certainly paid off, and this was a great start for us because the plant was up and running, the transmission system was largely intact, and very quickly we were able to get power to, of course, this substation and out to Grace Bay. This substation on the northwest Blue Hills, there was a lot of damage. This area in the high hills was severely damaged, and we had some work to do to get the transmission system back. And there was a lot of damage to the distribution feeders here. This area over here, on the north side, I should say, is where the development lies. These are the large resorts, the pretty beaches. And a lot of this system at Grace Bay was designed underground. Of course, it stood up quite well. So very quickly, we were able to restore power to a lot of this area of Provo. Other areas, just to be quick, this is Long Bay area. This was pretty much flattened. And that had to be rebuilt completely. And when we rebuilt it, we designed it to a stronger standard. Areas here, like this is called Venetian Road, Turtle Creek. These were heavily damaged. There'd be a lot of work and a long time to get this back on. We knew that. In this area, Probably a little poorer part of the country, 5Ks, completely devastated. This had to be completely rebuilt, as did a lot of the work up here in Blue Hills. So I'll give you some sense of the damage, but the fortunate thing was the transmission system and the generation plants stood up pretty well. So I'll carry on. Just to give you how we do this then, you get the transmission system up, you get the substation energized, then you work on what we call the main trunk lines, the main trunk feeders. You do your damage assessment, you try to get those trunk lines up, and you try to pick up any what we call critical or essential customers off those trunk lines. Then you work your way down the line to line sections, what we call taps or laterals. Then you're working right down to the transformer level, down to the service level. Obviously, those are going to be done last and lower priority. The objective is to, with the least amount of work, get as many customers back on as you can. And on top of that, you overlay what the government and utility deem to be the essential services and those critical customers. You try to get those as you work it through too. So that was some of the challenges. And on top of that, we're looking at areas that were completely destroyed. It was a great opportunity to do some improvements. So I'm going to talk a little bit of that on a later slide. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So just to give you a sense of the key customers, obviously hospitals and medical clinics, the water plants I mentioned, public emergency shelters. The prison on Grand Turk was a priority for the government. Orphanages, shipping docks, government buildings, grocery stores, banks, the immigration and customs buildings, schools and churches, and of course resorts and hotels at some point. The main point I want to say here, and it's probably no surprise, that to have success in these events, you got to be well organized and you got to have good planning. And I think that goes without saying for most things we do. Every day we took time to plan and organize and schedule the next day's work for the crews. So when the crews came in the morning, they knew exactly what they're going to do, and we knew they were doing the priority work. And that kept them focused on the stuff that you should be doing to get the power back onto the priority areas and the essential customers. So the plan was all about what can we do to make sure and help those crews work productively. Mechanics worked night shift so that any damages to the trucks were done in the nighttime, so the trucks are ready next morning. We had fuel tankers come in, they were gassed up in the nighttime. The material list for next day jobs, they were picked in the evenings, and in the mornings when the crew came in, we put down several different material lay-down areas so they wouldn't be too much congestion with the trucks to get the material aboard the trucks, that sort of thing. And at times, of course, until more materials came in, sometimes we had to make do with what we had. We had to share some materials, share special tools and equipment amongst the crews. And if a shipment was late coming in, we actually had to salvage the older material, the hardware, the insulators, sometimes the conductor, to keep the work moving. So that's what you do in these circumstances, you improvise. This next one is a timeline, just to put it in perspective. The hurricane hit on the September 8th. We arrived on the 10th. The trucks arrived from the Fortis USA utilities sometime later. Then Hurricane Maria comes by. That slowed us down for about 3 days. And it didn't cause much additional damage to many of the islands, but the island of Grand Turk did sustain additional damage due to Maria. And we knew what we were facing. We released some of our contractors from our home utilities, and then they joined us. Actually, it was Vallard was the contractor who came to help. And you can see the timing of the different groups of Fortis utilities that came in. And all power was restored by November 6th. So that was our milestone. The graph underneath there, what you see is that's the timeline for restoring customers. So initially, of course, all customers were without power, and you just see how that restoration timeline works through. One little story with the demands with Irma. Just put this in scale. Like Florida Light and Power, they had a workforce of 27,000 utility workers. They brought them in from all over the states. They had millions of customers off. Their price tag is $1.3 billion on Irma. So things were going nuts in Florida and Georgia. We couldn't source transformers. We actually had to go to Quebec City to the plant and gather up transformers from Canadian utilities in Eastern Canada, put them on a transport, get them down to West Palm Beach, ship them over, and then distribute them from there. Give some sense of the logistics and just the demands that were on utility equipment and everything at that time. This next slide is just to give you an example. This is what we did every day. This was just a tracking tool we used to keep track of what was on, what customers were on, and you can just see the dashboard there for the various islands. And we found it helpful to share with the teams, a little morale booster, I guess, to see the progress we're making. But it was invaluable for Fortis TCI with their communications with government and key customers and the media. And of course, getting the work done safely was what it was all about for us. And each visiting Fortis utility followed their own safety rules and work methods that they used back in their home utility. Every morning we would have a safety meeting and review the work for the day and what the hazards might be, make sure everyone was aware of what was going on. Throughout the project, the Fortis TCI safety personnel were invaluable. They were a huge resource to draw upon to help us understand and deal with any health or safety issue. So that worked well. And we did all this work with no serious injury. There were a few minor injuries. We had a bruised foot, a bruised back, and a cut to a hand requiring stitches, but nobody got seriously hurt, thank God. Almost done. The opportunities to upgrade. So this was a real balancing act for us to decide you don't want to spend the time to redesign and build new and upgrade if it's going to slow you down too much to get power back on. So it's a bit of a balance, and you got to work with what you have. Sometimes you didn't have all the material and conductor to do a complete rebuild, but we did integrate a fair bit into it. An example, like on Grand Turk, it was largely a rebuild of the complete system. And before that, you just had one circuit tied into the generating plant. And if there was a problem on that circuit, it took out the plant and all the customers. So when we rebuilt the system on Grand Turk, we laid out 3 trunk lines to form 3 future feeders with the thinking that in the future, they will build a substation and they will have 3 circuits and separate trouble on the system from taking out the other circuits in the plant, stuff like that. In Blue Hills, along the Millennium Highway, we knew they were going to widen the highway there and make it a double lane each way. So when we rebuilt the trunk feeder line there, we moved it to the new right-of-way, designed it for double circuit so they have capacity for a second circuit for future low growth. So those are some examples of where we took opportunities to improve and upgrade the system. And then there was little things like just installing more anchors and guys to keep the lines from being knocked down. And things like replacing critical structures with steel. I think that's one of the pictures you see there on the right, just to make it a stronger design. We installed a lot more switches and fuses so the system would operate more efficiently in the future. So I'll give you a sense of it from an engineering perspective. We did bring down designers and engineers, and these were some of the things we were able to do kind of on the fly with the resources we had. But like I say, it was a balancing act about how much you could do with upgrades. And just to bring it home, here's just a few examples of very, very many thank you notes that we received. And I can tell you personally, hardly a day went by when some member of the public didn't come up to me or a crew, stop, roll down the window, say, thank you. Thank God you're here. That's the type of stuff they would say to help us get our electricity back. So the effort, our presence, the Canadian flags that we flew, very much appreciated. And that was, heartfelt, I'll tell you that. So people appreciate it, and it all worked out very, very well. It came together for us, and we were all done in 60 days. So it was good news. It was certainly a feel-good project for me personally as well. And I guess to top it off a little bit, in January 10th, Fortis was awarded with the Edison Electric Institute Award for the Emergency Response Award, which was just recognition for the job that we did and the assistance we lend to restore power to the Turks and Caicos Islands. And just to clue it up, we're quite proud of the fact that the Fortis Group were the first humanitarian resources in that country when the all clear was given. So we were out of the blocks early, and that gave us a jump on things, and that was certainly appreciated and recognized by the people in the country. That's all I have. Certainly entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Very, very impressive work that you have done there, Sean, as well as Fortis and the team. So at this point, I would like to open it up to the audience if there are any questions. I do have a mic here, and if you raise your hand, I will come by and pass it over to you. So questions for Mr. LaCour?
Well, we were pretty fortunate. We did find a resort that was open, and they worked to get it open for us. It had no electricity for the first few days, but they were on a part of the system. We were able to get electricity up to pretty quickly. And we kind of, the visiting utility, Fortis TCI, kind of knew that. So save for the first few days, and we lost power for a couple of days. We were pretty fortunate. Stayed on a nice resort, had AC most nights, left it in the dark in the morning, came back, and it was dark, but it was a nice bed.
Sean, can you relate it to similar occurrences here? I know we're a bigger area, but 1,500 poles. Can you relate that to some of our power system major events?
Jeff, to go back before Newfoundland was hit with a 1,500 pole, you've gone back, I think, to 1984 with the big sleet storm. So that would be a big task for us. And that would be about the limit for us without bringing in more materials and a huge influx of contractors. We would certainly bring in the other Fortis groups to help with it, but that would be best efforts, a couple of weeks' work.
Okay, I'm coming.
Some years back when I was editor of the Dialogue for Engineers, I was able to get Earl Ludlow to write up a most engaging account of Newfoundland Power's experiences in Jamaica, in their contribution to putting power back on in Jamaica. That story and most of the copies of the Dialogue for Engineers is filed in the Newfoundland room at Memorial University. I'm wondering, are you planning to write this thing up? And if you do, I'd certainly recommend you file a copy of the report with the Newfoundland room, so it will chronicle a most engaging and interesting story of our engineering heritage.
Well, thank you very much for that comment, and I'll probably look to Karen McCarthy, who's with Fortis and the communications director there. But it's a great story, yeah, and I think probably we should, preserve it and write it down. It is part of our history in some way, in a small way. Certainly a history of the company. Thanks for that. Yep, Bill.
Hi, Sean, was there any financial contributions by other groups like governments or to offset some of the costs that the Fortis group undertook to restore service?
I'm not really sure how to answer that, Bill. Not that I'm aware of. I think Fortis will take this on the chin. Karen, I don't know if you can add anything to that, or yeah.
So generally speaking, in these sorts of situations, there's not really any money provided by governments to get through efforts like this. But we normally, maybe not so much in the Caribbean, but normally, particularly in the US and Canada, there would already be, agreements worked out between utilities and their local regulators, like the Public Utilities Board here, to manage your way through emergency situations. Would you say that that's fair, Gary? And so we probably spent about $25 to $30 million, I think, on this effort. And I'm looking at my colleague Gary here again for confirmation. And the idea would be that over time, you would hope you would be able to recoup some of those costs through changes in your electricity rates, right? Because you've just put in an awful lot of new infrastructure in the company. But I think truth of the matter is, oftentimes in these situations, you don't necessarily get it all back. But we will work with the local regulators at Turks and Caicos to see what we can do to move that along.
I can tell you the rates now are kind of high with the diesel generation. The 40 cents a kilowatt hour is what the customer pays.
Sean, what about the challenges getting materials and people and all that between all the islands?
Yeah, good point, Gary, because it was one thing. Most of the stuff came out of Palm Beach. Some trucks came out of Alabama, but they had to come into Provo, the bigger ships. That's the only place the bigger ships could dock. Of course, then if they had to go out to the smaller islands, like you saw there, Grand Turk or South Caicos, they had to go on a smaller ship or a smaller barge. And that was, a lot of logistics to get it out there, and it was time-consuming. Sometimes they couldn't sail because it was too windy, so it was a real nightmare and a bit frustrating. So it's, getting stuff to these islands is a real challenge, and it was out of control. So it was a variable we couldn't manage to.
I'm just curious. So your other island that you have is Grand Cayman. Is it that Fortis is in?
It is, yeah.
So in light of this and how hurricanes can devastate this area, is Fortis or the companies in these islands and in Turks and Caicos, are you looking at possibly burying more plant in the future? Like you said, the power plant was shored up in 2008.
Yep.
What have you learned from this hurricane, and also what you can apply to Grand Cayman so that another devastating hurricane won't cost as much and won't be as devastating?
Yeah, great question. And Grand Cayman, CUC utility, did learn from the last hurricane, 2004 Ivan. And following that, they did a complete rebuild of their transmission system and hurricane-proof their substations and plants. And they have a much tougher, hardened system now, but they put the money into it. And I guess there's always that balance. I guess in an ideal world with an engineering cap on, you put everything underground. It's just the price is so much more costly than the overhead solution. So in the Turks and Caicos after Ike in 2008, they went halfway. Put one transmission circuit loop system, which is great, one underground and one overhead, and spent some money on it. But yeah, I guess there's no limit to how much you can spend to try to make the system withstand a hurricane. But a full brunt of a Category 5 hurricane, that's not that we weren't trying to design to that. I think Category 4 was the limit. And I guess it just gets cost prohibitive to build it to a higher standard. But certainly they learned that the system stood up much better this time than with Ike, and that's certainly a testament to the upgrading and the money and the investment that he put into the utility system.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, so, yeah.
Yep.
What's happening in Puerto Rico that they're so
I don't really know, to be honest with you. Seemed like they weren't, well organized from the get-go. I'm reading some stories about FEMA and some challenges they had getting stuff there, but I really can't tell you why it's like that to this day, other than it was mass destruction. And I think the remaining customers that are out are in the remote, hilly parts of the country, the rural sides, but I can't really answer that, to be honest with you. I will tell you a little funny story before I leave. On South Caicos, our guys were out there in the sweltering heat, no power into the hotel, and up comes the HMS St. John, of the Canadian Navy frigate, pulls up in the little fishing community of South Caicos, and dropped off some food and water and supplies, and brought up a few of their mechanics, got the diesel going, and got the AC going in the hotel. So, thank you to Canadian Navy. You don't know where they're going to show up.
Okay, well, Sean, I'd just like to say once again how much we appreciate you coming this evening to tell this incredible story. When you look at how quickly power was restored, and 100% of it within this time frame, and the positive impact, the huge impact that it made on the people on the islands. It's really something that, you know, I'm reflecting that we have a lot of pride in our faculty, just in the fact of this lecture theatre itself, as you may know, recently renamed the Fortis Angus Bruno Lecture Theatre. So to have that name there is a great thing. So Sean, on behalf of the faculty, I would like to just present a small gift of appreciation and ask everyone again to, let's give Sean another round of applause for a great job.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to invite up Jeff Emberley, again, who is the CEO and Registrar of Paganel, to say a few words on behalf of Paganel.
Thank you, Dr. Netter. It's great to be here, and it's great to be part of this. These type of events are very important to us. It's part of our outreach, partnering with Memorial University Engineering to bring greater awareness about such things to the public. The Paganel itself, Professional Engineers and Geoscientists, Newfoundland and Labrador, is a regulatory body. Under a provincial act, we have 5,000 license holders in our organization, both engineers and geoscientists. We're governed by a board, mostly elected from the license holders, but also government appointed, operated under an act. And we work in the public interest, primarily a licensing body is what we are. I'd like to thank Sean especially for this presentation. I've known Sean over 30, 40 years, I guess. I too worked at Newfoundland Power for many years, and I remember the first one. I was not part of it, but I remember myself and Sean thinking, and others, we worked in central Newfoundland at the time with Newfoundland Power, and we were selecting people to go down in the crew from central Newfoundland, and that was the beginnings of it. And they were coming from other parts of the island as well. But for me, it's sort of poignant to be in this room because it was in the very early stages of Newfoundland Power forming Fortis. And no mistake that Angus Bruno was part of the leadership team that initiated this whole thing, and the culture of Newfoundland Power to be part of it and to initiate it. So it's really a great thing to see this have continued through the Fortis Group and all these different people that have been helped through the hard work of Newfoundland Power and Fortis employees. So I, as a former Newfoundland Power employee, I feel good about this, and as a Newfoundland and Labradorian as well. It's a real tribute. And thank you very much, Sean. Really appreciate it. And I think there's refreshments outside, and people are welcome to stay and enjoy the refreshments and chat a bit more. And thanks again, Sean.